Story number 1. In western Oklahoma, I was driving a late-night delivery through the twisting sections of Route 71. There was only me, my Freightliner, and a dense darkness that engulfed the road beyond my high beams on the silent highway. Fatigue swept over me like a veil at 2:43 a.m. I required a respite, a spot to park, take a break, and possibly get some water. Then I noticed it. A blue highway sign with white letters that had faded. Rest area of Hollow Pines. 1 mile. I did not have it on my GPS. I had never seen it, but I was too exhausted to give a damn. I pulled into the parking lot. It was incorrect. That is the only term I can think of. Although it was old and appeared deserted, the rest area was still intact. The restroom's lights were barely buzzing. A vending machine with no power cord attached was buzzing softly, and there were 2 picnic tables beneath a shattered canopy. My rig was positioned at the far end. There was complete quiet. I stepped outside and stretched. At that moment, I became aware of something strange. No bugs were present. Not a single cricket. No wind. No natural noises at all. Only a faint murmur. I went to the bathroom. The interior mirrors were too spotless, as if they had been meticulously cleaned. However, names were etched into the tiles and the paint on the walls was flaking. One read, "This is not a place to rest. You will never be able to move time again." Another person stated, "When you close your eyes, she appears." I took a step back. In the mirror, my image wavered like water. I hurried out of the restroom. I chose to simply take a nap in the taxi. I closed my eyes, leaned back in my seat, locked the doors, and, out of habit, activated my dash cam. A few seconds went by. Then I heard it, crying. Like a child wandering in the woods. The cries were soft and broken. From outside my truck, it arrived. I went cold. The cab was encircled by the sound. I opened my eyes. Outside fog was forming on the windows, as if someone were breathing on them. Staring through the windshield, I sat up. She was present, positioned 20 feet forward of my rig. A woman with long black hair, a mud-soaked white clothing, and a head tilt that appeared to be broken at the neck. Her limbs were lifeless and her lips hung open. Additionally, her feet were off the ground. She lingered. She was nearer when I blinked. I pressed the gas and slammed the truck into drive. I ran out of the lot and back into Route 71, my tires screaming on the gravel. I continued to go till I was many miles away. However, after reviewing my dashcam footage, behind me, there was nowhere to relax. The road goes on forever. Where I halted, nothing. It jumped the timestamp, between 2:43 and 3:27 in the morning, as though almost an hour had passed. Additionally, the camera flickered in the video right prior to the time jump, and in a single frame, the screen was filled with the woman's face. A broad, decaying grin. Eyes that are black. I could not hear the mouth speaking something. I removed the video. However, it did not stop there. I continued to see signs for Hollow Pines rest area on different roads for weeks after that, even in states where they should not be. Texas, Arizona, in Nebraska even. Identical symbol. The font is also crooked. I did not follow it again. However, I still occasionally see her. In my mirrors. On the side of the road. Hovering. Waiting. And I am certain that I will not drive away if I ever stop again. For the dead, time does not pass. She also constantly waits for someone who is too exhausted to notice. Story number 2. The night was in early December and extremely cold. The road hummed beneath my tires as I transported freight from Denver to El Paso, which was primarily made up of deserted areas, dust plains, and chilly winds. Hours had passed with no sound from the CB. Other truckers had vanished into the static or turned in. I crossed mile marker 313 on Route 54 in New Mexico at 3:11 a.m. For a moment, my headlights flickered. After coughing, the engine stabilized. I did not give it much thought. However, I saw it once again less than a minute later. Marker 313 mile. The tire tread on the shoulder next to it is the same, as are the faded numbers and the twisted metal post. I slowed the truck and blinked. There was no way. 2-mile 313 markers should not be placed consecutively. I continued driving. Another 313 3 minutes later. I stopped. My dash's temperature gauge started to rise. The truck's inside was growing hotter despite the frigid weather outside. Boots crunching in the dry shoulder dust. I stepped outside. The silence reigned. Completely still. I approached and touched the marking. The temperature was warm. My rig's engine abruptly died behind me. The headlights were turned down. The lights in the cabin flickered once before going out. Then the atmosphere shifted. Just inches from my ear, there was a low, gravelly murmur. "Do not continue." I whirled. There is nobody there. I tried the ignition after running back to the cab. It refused to turn. I grabbed my flashlight. I noticed her at that point. In my side mirror, there was a woman behind my trailer. Long, matted hair that stuck to her face, pale skin, and a clothing so wet she looked like she had just crawled out of a river. She remained still, simply gazing. There was no air to breathe, no weight moving, not human. I snatched up my crowbar and threw open the door. Gone. I circled the vehicle. Nothing. With my heart racing, I climbed back inside. At this point, the temperature gauge had fallen below zero. Immediately, my breath became hazy. My radio then crackled. Suddenly, loudly, a voice, broken and sharp, came through. "You have already surpassed 313. It is not appropriate for you to be here." I gazed intently at the speaker. Once more it crackled. "Swivel about." Prior to her riding alongside you. The radio turned off, dead as a rock. My phone then rang. An unknown number. I did not respond. Rather, I prayed and pulled the key. The engine magically screamed back to life when I switched it on and slammed it back in. Tires kicking gravel, all the lights on my dashboard screaming. I pulled out of there. I reset my GPS. The compass rotated in circles. For what seemed like hours, I drove without thinking. I finally let out a breath when I saw the sunrise. I was now in Texas. Dazed, my fingers shaking, I drove into a truck stop just past Amarillo. At the diner, I explained the situation to another trucker. Like he had seen a ghost, he gazed at me. 313, he whispered. My brother drove a car. 10 years ago, he broke down at that marker. Never returned home. He hesitated. There, they located his truck. Running. Empty. Not a trace of him. I no longer travel Route 54. Whatever the load pays, it makes no difference. I also check the mirrors anytime my odometer reaches 313 points. Because I think I see her in the reflection on some evenings. Behind me in the sleeper cab. Smiling. Story number 3. Under a completely dark sky. The journey across miles of pine forest in northern Arizona was lengthy. I had a blown tire close to Flagstaff, so I was running late. My eyes were beginning to become weary, and midnight had passed. The sign read Devil's Creek Rest Stop 2 miles at that point. My GPS did not show it. But caffeine had long since worn me out, and I was tired. I rolled into the rest station after turning off Route 89. One asphalt strip, long and cracked. One overhead lighting flickered. An old-fashioned vending machine. A bathroom with decaying, discolored brickwork. Neither a soul nor another truck could be seen. After bringing the rig into the lot, I shut off the engine. The silence descended as soon as the rumble subsided. Too silent. Not a single cricket. No wind. No sound of trees rustling. Just a stifling silence, as if the forest as a whole were holding its breath. The chilly air pierced through my jacket when I stepped outside and stretched. I went to the vending machine and purchased a can of stale coffee. I heard it as I took my first sip. Whistling. From the forest. It sounded more like one continuous, off-key note than a melody. It ceased. Then there were footsteps. First soft, then crunching on leaves. I looked into the forest line as I turned. The darkness was hardly illuminated by my flashlight. I did not see anything. However, I sensed something. Something is observing. I ran back to the truck, climbed into the sleeper, locked the doors and closed the curtain. I held the crowbar next to me and continued to use the flashlight. I had trouble falling asleep. I heard breathing outside the taxi around 2:13 in the morning. Exhale slowly and damply near the driver's side window. And then there was a knock. Knocking, not tapping. 3 careful, unhurried taps on the window pane. I took a quick look through the curtain. There was a dude. But he was mistaken. He had a gray face, hollow, sunken eyes, wearing a ripped delivery uniform that was saturated with a dark substance. His mouth was wider than it should have been for a man. He was grinning as well. Then he said something. His speech sounded like smoke and gravel. "Driver, let me in." I did not get there. I let out a yell and got the truck going. He remained still, simply stood and gazed. I blew it away. Tires roaring, they tore out of the lot. He was still standing there, motionless, in my side mirror. And I glanced in the rearview mirror as I pulled onto the highway. The sleeper cab was where he was. I nearly jackknifed the truck after making a sharp swerve. Slammed to a halt. Threw open the door and dashed into the freeway. There was nobody in the cab when I turned around. Headlights pierced the darkness as I stood trembling in the center of the deserted road. At last, with my hands numb and my heart pounding, I climbed back in. Until the sun rose, I drove. I explained the situation to the waitress when I pulled into a diner close to Page. She became pale. "Devil's Creek?" she wanted to know. In 1983, they closed that rest stop. There, a trucker was killed, fatally stabbed in his taxi. They claim that he continues to attempt hitchhiking. I did not think she was real. That is, until I glanced at the rearview mirror, on the sleeper curtain, and noticed a damp handprint. Story number 4. Between Roswell and El Paso, the roadway was a long, barren expanse of blacktop. Even though I had traveled it 100 times before, that night was unique. The road was deserted, the sky was moonless, and it had been more than an hour since I had passed a car. There was no sound from my CB. It was only the tire hum, me, and the never-ending blackness of the desert. When I crossed mile marker 313, it began. With a swift flick of my eyes, I looked at the marker. Someone was standing in the center of the lane when I turned to face the road again. I applied the brakes firmly. Tires let out a cry. Before ultimately stopping sideways across both lanes, the trailer fishtailed. However, there was nobody on the road. Nobody was there. With a flashlight in hand, I hopped out of the taxi and swept the beam across the road, the shoulders, and the desert scrub while my heart pounded in my chest. Nothing. After that, I noticed the footsteps. Bare feet. Thin. Small. Leading directly into the desert from the middle of the road. They were damp instead of dusty as they ought to have been. It was as though someone had crossed a river barefoot. They simply stopped after I followed them for a few paces, as if they had disappeared in the middle of a step. A chilly sensation touched the nape of my neck. Quickly turned. Nobody. I sprinted back to the truck, secured the doors, and continued on my way. However, something had changed. It did not seem like the appropriate road. Mile marks ceased to appear. My GPS stopped working. The CB continued to produce static, interspersed with brief sounds that resembled breathing. Then I noticed it. The same individual in the center of the road, standing in the same spot. Again. I swerved this time and just missed them. I stopped again. The road was deserted once more. However, there was something in the trailer this time. I heard it. Dragging chains. From the trailer's rear. After pulling out my crowbar, I descended and carefully unlatched the trailer doors. Empty. With the exception of one rocking chair that groaned slowly. Under it, there was a puddle. Water. I went back to the cab after locking it once again. With the engine going and eyes on the mirrors, I sat quietly. The individual was standing on the hood as I looked up. The face is inches away from the windshield. Pale. Eyes that are sunken. Their chin was dripping with water. I could not hear the movement of their mouths. Then, with a snap, the windshield began to spider out from the middle. I blew it away. The truck lurched ahead, and the figure disappeared. I continued till the sun came up. I phoned my dispatcher as soon as I arrived in Roswell. Told him everything. He hesitated. "Mile marker 313? He said. "That is not feasible. What did he mean, I asked. In 1997, a flash flood forced the rerouting of that section of road. The entire segment has been removed, swept off. The new bypass must have been used by you. I didn't, I told him. He activated my tracker. Said my truck stayed on the main roadway at all times. However, I recalled the footsteps, the rocking chair, the face. I took another look at the trailer that evening. The chair was gone. The puddle, however, remained. And now, regardless of where I am, I drive every night at 3:13 a.m. My windshield begins to fracture. I hear chains, too, moving gently across the trailer's rear.